claims of abuse of the government being used for political purpose, they were more true than we knew. Trump was making those claims, but he was also the one doing what he was complaining about. The New York Times nails the Trump administration for going to extremes to track down leaks in the early years of the term, hunting for sources behind media reports about contacts between Trump associates and Russia, contacts that happened. The Times says the Trump trio J, under Jeff Sessions, took the extraordinary step of having prosecutors subpoena Apple for data from the accounts of at least 2 Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, along with their aides, their family members, and even kids. And they put a gag order on Apple. So Apple wasn't allowed to tell anybody about what was going on, even though they were main members of this government. Now, one of them was Adam Schiff, who's now chairman of the Intel Committee. He ultimately led the prosecution in Trump's first impeachment. He is coming on this show in a moment. But this is much bigger than him. He tells the Times the subpoenas for data on him and others were used as a cudgel against his political opponents, Trump's political opponents, and members of the media. The politicization of the department and the attacks on the rule of law are among the most dangerous assaults on our democracy carried out by a former president. Remember, we know that Trump took this stuff very seriously because he complained about it all the time. This is the deep state. What was that about? It was using those who are behind the machinery of government to do bad political things. That is exactly what he was doing, according to the New York Times. The White House was adamant that the sources be found and prosecuted, they report, and the Justice Department began a broad look at national security officials from the Obama administration. We had heard of going after reporters, even their phone records, including a member of CNN. But going after the main members of the opposing party and their families? The New York Times reports that investigators also opened cases that focused on then FBI Director Comey and his deputy at the time, Andrew McCabe, and that repeatedly the same staff that was tasked with these investigations kept arguing there was no case and that it looked bad. But they were told by Sessions and then Bill Barr to keep going, sparking concerns this was about politics, not protecting national security. Andrew is with us tonight, along with Norm Eisen. Good to have you both. Andrew, obviously, you're aware of some of this because you were caught up in it. Understanding more of the scope and who they were going after and what the pushback was from the same staff, what does it tell you?
Well, honestly, Chris, I mean, I obviously I know that the president and his henchmen have had it out for me for many years. I mean, that's not a surprise. But the revelations that we've been privy to over the last few weeks about the subpoenas of journalists' records, and now the absolutely, I don't want to say unprecedented, the groundbreaking step of subpoenaing data, private data of a sitting member of Congress. Like, I had never, I had no idea that that kind of stuff was going on. And it is just, 21 years in law enforcement. I served at every level you can possibly serve at as an agent in the FBI. And I have never seen activity like this on the part dictated by the Department of Justice. I think that William Barr will go down in history as the person most responsible for undermining the Justice Department and using it as a political weapon, more so than anyone who has sat in that chair in the entire history of this department. It's an absolute disgrace what he did to that institution.
Norm, have you ever heard of anything like this, and why is it remarkable to you?
Chris, in my 30 years in Washington, representing people in front of Congress and at DOJ, working in government and the executive branch as a staff member, like those staff members who got subpoenaed in Congress, it is completely without a precedent. It's groundbreaking and earth-shaking. And there are going to be consequences. There's going to be fallout, Chris. You're going to see congressional investigations. We're going to need to have a policy or maybe laws, not just to protect reporters. We talked about that a few weeks ago, but to protect members of Congress. Chris, they even went after the child of one of these targets on the Hill to get information about a child's account from Apple. And then there's the question of Bill Barr, as Andy says. We've already had 2 judges criticize him for a cover-up in connection with protecting Trump from obstruction charges. Now people are going to be looking at his law license afresh. So expect a lot of legal fallout from this.
In terms of the practicality of it, Andrew, when you were in the, you served at the highest levels of the DOJ. If you had guys and women that you would task with something come to you repeatedly and say, it's not there. This is getting weird that you have us on this. We're not finding anything. And even the things we're finding, even against Comey, we can't make a case. How often was it that you guys would say, keep looking, just keep looking?
Anyone who has served in a leadership position in the FBI or the Department of Justice will tell you that your job as a leader is to oversee these investigations, to listen to what your investigators tell you, to process the facts as they are uncovering them, and to take the recommendations of your investigative teams in terms of the steps you're going to take going forward. So on the day they come to you and say, we think we're done, you may question and ask a few questions and make sure that all the T's have been crossed and the I's are dotted. But when the investigators say there's no case here, then that's the time to stop the institution from investigating a private citizen. It's clearly, what you had here was William Barr throwing a Hail Mary pass to try desperately to generate some sort of information to put some of the president's enemies in jail. I know this from personal experience, so in some really sad way, I'm not surprised with some of these revelations.
Jeff Sessions first, and then William Barr. Norm, the idea of, well, this is what the government does. No. This is not the same thing as going after Congressman Matt Gaetz for alleged behavior where you have proof and allegations of criminality from another guy who's already indicted. This was an investigation in search of a crime, in search of proof, not the opposite. Big distinction?
Yes, there are cases where there have been serious allegations of corruption by a member of Congress. The William Jefferson case is one that comes to mind, where there's investigative tools that are deployed. But Chris, this was a pure act of political retaliation. It was abuse of power. We talked this week about the president's former lawyer and the extraordinary things the White House counsel said, describing the president's behavior as crazy stuff, only he didn't use the word stuff. This is more of the same, and it makes you wonder how much more of this is going to come out. How much more abuse happened by Trump and by those who were doing his bidding. And in the Department of Justice, that is just appalling. And I think there are going to be consequences for Barr out of this revelation, and there should be.
Right. But look, Pelosi says she supports Chairman Schiff. We're going to have him on coming up in the show. But this is much bigger than Schiff. And the idea that they're going to look into it. Okay. Now, what is most shocking in terms of scale here, Andrew? You have Sessions does it. Okay. Maybe or maybe not at Trump's direction. Okay. We had heard that he was directing him in public to do it. So we assume that the president was telling the truth because the same thing was happening. Then it gets shut down by lack of information. Then Barr comes in, and in February of 2020, Barr brings in a new guy, a prosecutor from New Jersey with no particular pedigree in this type of stuff. He was about gangs and healthcare fraud, to reopen all of the cases. People come, and I'm reading this from the New York Times, they come and tell Mr. Barr and Mr. Benvenuto at multiple meetings, it's not there, it's not there. We can't do anything with this. And they are told to keep going. I've never heard of anything like that before, of things being reopened is rare enough once you guys shut it down if there's no new information. But to have somebody say, no, we got to keep doing this.
Go find it, right? So when have we heard this before? Well, we heard it pretty recently in Trump's phone call to the Secretary of State of Georgia. Go find my votes. Go find the fraud for the election. That was the modus operandi of this administration. They wanted what they wanted, and they didn't care what they had to do to get it. So two things quick, Chris. I will tell you, I oversaw many leak cases in my time as National Security EAD and also Deputy Director. Eric Holder changed the rules on how we could think about going after reporters' information. And essentially, it eliminated it. It didn't happen after Holder changed that policy. So the fact that they did it so many times in the last few years of the Trump administration is absolutely mind-blowing to me. And the last point I'd leave you with is, let's remember, as a point of context, this is the same group that's still yelling and screaming. Trump is still yelling and screaming to this day about how dare us actually seek FISA coverage over a former campaign foreign policy advisor who'd already been separated from the campaign and who Trump couldn't pick out of a lineup. That's right. And now and this is the same group that's so offended by that, but they're actively pursuing the records of members of Congress and the media to pursue some leak conviction fantasy.
I mean, that is the disgusting aspect
the
of
height
it,
of hypocrisy.
Look, I mean, look, you read the reporting for yourself at home and you backtrack it and just start with this one understanding. They were looking at these guys for breaches of national security. But by definition, Trump, if you believe him, there couldn't have been a breach of any national security because there were no contacts that were in any way damning. So why would you have people looking for leaked information that was a matter of national security if you believed everything that had been done was fine? So, Norm, you take it from there. And this is a man in an administration, as Andrew tickles the point, where they bang deep state. They bang guys like you and McCabe, you deep state people who've been around government. You abuse the processes for political power. That's what you do. Have you ever seen a more egregious example than this?
Chris, it's the naked abuse of power for retaliation, revenge, and destruction. And you can draw a straight line through from Trump's comments. Russia, if you're listening, abuse as you'll be mightily rewarded. Abuse as a candidate, to his abuses in office. We're finding out more about what went on. And, the capacity, we should not lose our capacity to be shocked about this, but we also should ask, what can we do to make sure that people face consequences, starting with a challenge to Bill Barr, legal ethics. He should not any longer be allowed to have his law license. And how can we change it so this never happens again in America?
Andrew, do you have an answer to that question? And is part of the answer found in the fact that, as I identified in the reporting, Mr. Demers, Ms. Edelstein, Mr. Blue, and Mr. Benvenuto are all still at the Justice Department. And therefore, they're not able to say, I don't want to talk about this, because they'll be talking to their bosses. And they can go through what they were told and now do it through the lens of Attorney General Merrick Garland. How important is that they're still there in terms of understanding what this was about and what change needs to be taken?
Yeah, well, where is the investigation, right? Where is the outrage from the DOJ IG? Where, as sitting employees, they have to cooperate with that sort of investigation unless they face some unless they face criminal liability individually, which is unlikely here. So, they're there. If there was a legitimate investigation of this put forth by either the AG or the Inspector General, they would have to tell what they knew. There will be records of those conversations. There will be emails. There will be text messages between employees, and all of that stuff should be looked at. We need an accounting as a nation of what happened inside our Department of Justice. It's not Trump's Department of Justice or Biden's or anyone else's. It's the people's Department of Justice, and it looks like it was taken pretty far off the rails.
Let's do this. Let me take a break. There's a lot more in the reporting here in terms of the scale of the scope. And one of the things that makes it most shocking, again, I've made this point with Andrew, but not in context of everything that happened. The number of times that Sessions and then Bill Barr were told, we don't know why you're having us do this. And things that happened that made it pointless and were ignored are just as shocking as who they went after. Please, Andrew, Norm, I'll buy you dinner. I'm sure you're missing invitations right now. Stay with us, and we'll keep this up because this is a very important story for people to understand about how our government was being abused. Stay with us.
One-on-one. This is CNN Breaking News.
CNN has confirmed that the Trump administration was using the Department of Justice and its assets and resources to go after political rivals in looking for leaks, specifically about contacts between the Trump administration and Russian associates. Now, we have never seen or heard of the detailed scope and extent of going after political opposition without finding a single shred of proof, with investigators consistently pushing back against their bosses that there's nothing there and this is going to look bad. We just got from the House Intelligence Committee the following. Individuals associated with the committee, we know at least Chairman Schiff and another Democrat, so two sitting members of the House Intelligence Committee, they had scrubbed metadata, went to Apple, got a gag order so Apple couldn't tell them until just now. This was in 2017, 2018. Including members, current and former staff of the committee, and their family members, including minor children, were notified last month by Apple that the Department of Justice had issued grand jury subpoenas in February 2018 for their information. The breadth of these requests for information, a long list which included the chairman and the potentially partisan nature of the subpoenas, raised troubling questions about the department's willingness to engage in a partisan investigation on the former president's behalf. Now, we have Norm Eisen, Andrew McCabe, and Dana Bash joining us. Dana, let me ask you the question that started all of our conversations tonight, which is, have you ever heard of anything like this?
No, and it's so easy now, especially looking back and learning more about the Trump administration, to say, oh, this is just another norm-busting move by the Trump administration. It's not. It's not. I mean, it was bad enough when we learned about the information that they were seeking from reporters. But to do this, not just from members of Congress, but from specifically members of Congress who had been aggressively trying to investigate them. Congress is first in the Constitution. Congress has the oversight, not the administration. And the fact that the DOJ was used in so many political ways, but in this particular unprecedented, as far as we know, remarkable way, I don't even have words for it.
Now, the good news, Andrew, as we discussed earlier, the people who are involved at the higher levels are still there. So they would have to cooperate with any internal investigation. If they started asking for information in 2018 and Apple was gagged until just last month, does that mean that they could have been collecting data on these people all the way through the Trump administration? Because it doesn't say when it stopped.
It's really hard to know that at this point, Chris. We haven't seen any of the legal process that was served on Apple, which would have the time period for which the collection was authorized. So it may have been, it could have been 30 days, it could have been longer than that. The non-disclosure orders that sometimes accompany that sort of process typically run much longer than the collection period. So it's hard to make an assumption about that based just on how long we know the gag order was in place.
And Norm, the idea of who was involved, going after Obama staff, interviewing them, no charges, then it gets a little sticky for them because Ratcliffe, who was the director of national intelligence and a close Trump ally, damaged the inquiry in May 2020 when he declassified transcripts of the calls. The authorized disclosure would have made it more difficult for prosecutors to argue the news stories. So at the same time that they were hunting down the leakers, his own guy put out the transcripts of the calls, which made it harder to make it a national security case.
Chris, one of the reasons that democracy survived the onslaught of the past 4 years is this was the gang that couldn't shoot straight. When I was counsel for the Committee on the Impeachment, I saw then Congressman Ratcliffe up close, and he was a complete lapdog pet poodle for Donald Trump, doing whatever he thought would win the favor of the president. And to think that he enjoyed the incredible power of the DNI and the ability to do damage is terrifying. And Chris, I don't think we're at the end. You and I have talked about this, and we keep saying, where is the bottom? I don't think we're at the end of hearing these revelations. It was a seemingly bottomless pit of abuse of power. It's the nightmare of the framers.
Well, it's interesting that it took this long to come out, to be honest, Anna. I'm kind of surprised by that. Now, in this statement from the committee, there's some interesting language. The committee expects the department, DOJ, to provide additional information, and we would support an internal investigation by the department into its own actions. It's kind of light language there. It doesn't seem as though they're like, we're calling you, figure out what happened. They're all still there, and then come tell us, because we have to figure out who to go after about this. Doesn't seem that strident.
It doesn't, probably because it's not the Trump administration in charge now. An investigation seems pretty sort of basic when you're talking about the Biden administration and you're talking about Merrick Garland, who was specifically tapped by President Biden in order to separate the Justice Department from, really horrific notions like what we are seeing reported tonight. And so, this is a Democrat calling on a Democratic administration to do something that probably doesn't need to be demanded like we saw when the Trump administration was there.
Andrew, what do you say to members of the current administration? President Biden, and Dana, check me on this if you think I'm going too far. He was pretty quick to say early on, no, I don't want to investigate Trump anymore. And I have heard from people around him, and we've heard from the president before, we really want this guy in the rearview mirror. If they say, look, don't chase this down, make sure it doesn't happen again, change your internal procedures, talk to the people who did it, make sure it wasn't their idea, but then leave it alone. What is your word of advice? Is that okay with you?
Absolutely not. And I doubt that this administration, that President Biden would send that sort of direction to the Justice Department. The Justice Department should be opening and closing investigations based on the facts that they find and the information that's presented to them. They should not be taking direction from the White House on how to pursue investigations, why they should keep open investigations that the facts, like here, didn't call for continuing. I don't see AG Garland taking that sort of direction from the White House, and I don't think the White House would give it. It's up to the Department of Justice to try to break away from this sordid and mercifully short history under former President Trump. And honestly, I'm not sure that you want DOJ doing that investigation entirely independently and internally. Maybe the time has come for Congress to get involved and to start calling people up to the Hill, sitting them down in front of the microphone and collecting some testimony so we all find out about the sort of activities that were going on under Sessions and Trump.
Norm, don't get mad at me, but doesn't Congress kind of stink at this? I mean, how many hearings have we watched where they have people come on, where it becomes like a circus and they're all trying to pose with their questions? Sometimes people do well. Sometimes people evince testimony when they have people like you putting all the ideas in their head. But most of the time, they're not that great at this, are they?
Chris, that's why you bring in outside counsel. I had the privilege of doing it in the first impeachment, of examining witnesses, kicking off the hearing by examining the witnesses, and then the members ask their question. So in every important investigation of the modern times, from Watergate on down, they've brought in outside counsel to help do the work, to help organize the work. And that's what's going to be needed. I agree with Andy. I think Congress needs to look at this, and they need to do a serious inquiry, either with a capable counsel from the outside, or staff counsel can also very ably ask questions, lead the inquiry. Let's figure out what happened. Let's pass a law so that it's not just a matter of, oh, you violated ethics rules. DOJ internal ethics rules, by the way, say you can't pursue investigations for political reasons or to curry favor with the president. But that's not enough. We need tougher restrictions here. Frankly, for the really outrageous abuses, we may need not only civil remedies, but also criminal ones. We can't let this happen again in America. It's just too dangerous.
Dana, last word to you, and
But are they-
any feel for the stomach of the Biden administration to go after this?
Well, it depends on how you define going after this, right? I mean, it seems to me that these two notions of DOJ doing an internal investigation and Congress doing its own investigation are not mutually exclusive. Part of the problem, as you were alluding to, Chris, is that Congress can have public hearings, and those are incredibly important, but it quickly devolves into partisanship. And the benefit of an IG report, in addition to that, is that it is independent. It is, yes, it's internal. Maybe there's another way to do it, but it seems to have more credibility because it comes from within, as opposed to Congress, which is incredibly partisan. Never mind the fact that we are talking about members of Congress who were at who are the victims here. They were the ones who were investigated in a way that does not seem appropriate.
Well, if we've learned anything recently, it's that Congress won't necessarily go after something, even if they are the targets and victims of the situation.
Yeah,
they wouldn't even investigate January 6th.
Good point.
But look, the way to do this is, I had your better minds. This is beautiful. Now we got to hear from Chairman Schiff, because if anybody's going to push the ball forward, he will. So thanks to them. And now there is the chairman. We'll take a break. We'll come back. When did he learn about this? What does he think about this? Why does he think this happened? And what does he think has to happen now? Next. All right, let's bring in one of the men at the middle of this breaking news about the Trump abuse of power, using the Department of Justice to go after political opponents. House Intel Committee Chair, Congressman Adam Schiff. Thank you for joining us on short notice, sir.
You bet. Good to be with you.
Let's start with a non-political question. How did you feel when you learned that you were being targeted this way by the United States government?
Look, shocked on the one hand, not surprised on the other. I did wonder, for a few years with the president calling for our committee to be investigated, calling for me to be investigated, whether, the department was going to do it. And certainly it looks like they were going after records of the committee, including my own. What they were looking for, I still don't know. Apparently they didn't find anything, but when they wanted to close down the investigation, Barr wouldn't let them. And it's just another terrible abuse of the rule of law, the Department of Justice. I spent almost 6 years with the Department of Justice. I love my experience there. I venerate the department, and to see how it was turned into this bludgeon to go after the president's enemies and a shield to protect those who lied for him, people like Roger Stone and Mike Flynn and others. It's disgraceful, but it's also such a body blow to our democracy.
Does it matter to you that they used grand juries to get this subpoena? Does that add legitimacy to the efforts?
It doesn't add legitimacy. It just kind of expands the abuse, to abuse the grand jury process in this way. And, while I can't go into who received these subpoenas or whose records were sought, I can't say that it was extraordinarily broad. People having nothing to do with the intelligence matters that are at least being reported on. It just shows what a broad fishing expedition it was, and so many norms were broken in connection with this. The norm of a president not involving himself in specific cases. Here you got the president calling on his opponents to be investigated. The norm of the president seeking records from a member of Congress and staff and doing so on a partisan basis. Going after a committee that was investigating him. One guardrail after another, just smashed by this unethical former president. And just shows you how much we are reliant on people to say no. And if they don't stand up to an unethical president, how quickly the guardrails can come down.
Well, two shocking things here. One, the situation is actually a little bit more perverse than even you suggested, because according to the New York Times, and as seconded by CNN in major part, the cases were looked at under Sessions, closed. Barr comes in 2020, and it's not just about keeping them going, it's restarting them. He brings in somebody new. He creates a new circle of trust. He is told by staffers, yeah, there's really nothing there. That's why the cases are closed, and reopens them. And the only thing that changed during that period, other than him, was Trump saying he wanted you looked at. Have you ever heard of anything like this before?
No, certainly not. And, we brought about these new norms after Watergate to prevent exactly this kind of abuse. But they didn't survive this presidency. And but it is shocking. At the same time, look, Bill Barr lied to the country about the Mueller report. He lied to Congress about what he was aware of, Mueller's objections to his false summary. He had a long pattern of duplicity, as well as intervening in specific cases of Roger Stone and Mike Flynn to try to protect those who were lying to cover up for the president, and to authorize investigations of his opponents. And so, I view Bill Barr as the second most dangerous person in the country after Donald Trump, and this is just further proof of that point.
Without revealing their identities, to your knowledge, how many people were swept up in this effort in terms of looking at people's records?
A lot. And the reality is, I don't fully know how many, because, and I think we'll find out about more now that the story has broken, because people got these notices, these emails from Apple, and thought they were either spam or that they were, some kind of a spear phishing attempt or something. And so I'm not sure that we know how many are impacted. And I would like to know, we've asked the Justice Department, was this just going after Democrats and Democratic staff? They know.
They know exactly who was looked at and for what period. Just to be clear, before people misconstrue the idea about Apple. Apple was under a gag order. And obviously you know all this, Chairman, but for the audience. So the DOJ said, you're going to give us these records and you're going to shut up. And ordinarily, that the period that they look for records is much shorter than how long someone is gagged to give them time to make a case. So Apple just started telling people last month. There was another provider who was telling people early last year that they had been asked about this. So Apple, didn't choose not to do this. They weren't allowed to do it, as far as we understand, under the gag order. But in terms of the scope of this, in just the last week, okay, people say don't look back. You have to, because such a big part of Trump's attraction was that he was going to go and disrupt the chaos. He was going to go in there and disrupt the ugliness and the deep state stuff. In just the last week, the CNN revelations, Meadows asking the DOJ to investigate nonsensical allegations of election fraud, the Rudy tape, Zelensky's assistant, the president of Ukraine at that time, watching and listening, echoing that, yeah, Rudy did it and then Trump did it. All of this was going on. And then the DOJ was being used as the muscle arm to shut people down who were going after the president's behavior. I mean, I can't think. I mean, it literally makes Watergate look like jaywalking.
Well, I remember during Marie Yovanovitch's testimony, and this was this courageous ambassador to Ukraine that the president and his son and others just ruthlessly smeared to the point where her life was in danger. I remember during her testimony, she was called by the State Department and said, you need to get back to Washington right away. You need to be on the next plane. And she was incredulous, what's happening, what's going on? And she talked about how she wondered, am I under investigation or something? And I remember thinking, I know how you feel. Now, I didn't know about this at the time, but I never expected in this country to feel the way that so many people do in the developing world, that they could be the subject of investigation by an unscrupulous executive just because they want it done. That's such a terrible turn for this country. We've got to put up stronger guardrails to make sure this kind of thing never happens again.
So what do you see as remedial here? The statement from the committee is, I have all this paper on my desk. The statement from the committee is that you look forward to information from the DOJ about this and you support an internal investigation. What needs to be done here? The good news is many of the people who are at the top of the food chain during these efforts are still at the DOJ, meaning that there will be a higher degree of compliance expected, assuming there's no criminality attached. And Andrew McCabe said, and I suggest the same, it's not a criminal situation at this point. What do you want to have happen?
Well, look, I think there needs to be an internal investigation within the Department of Justice, not just involving, this abuse of power with respect to our committee, but also what they were doing to reporters and press organizations, the Attorney General's intervention in specific cases like Roger Stone and Mike Flynn and others. I mean, in the case of Mike Flynn, this person who twice pled guilty, Barr went to the extraordinary step of seeking to have that case dismissed. The judge in that case appointed someone to advocate against the Justice Department. I mean, that just doesn't happen very often, if ever. And so I think the department needs to really clean house and look at all of these ways in which the department was abused and take corrective steps and implement new policies to make sure that this doesn't happen again. In terms of the Congress, I can't play a role because they went after some of my records. But I do think the department needs to do a lot of self-examination, get to the bottom of how it was misused and abused, and take corrective action.
Why are you conflicted out when you were victimized by the effort? They didn't find anything on you. The case is closed against you, and there was never any proof brought to any kind of point of consequence.
No, that's true. But, I think there would be a perception that I have a personal stake. And of course, as a victim of this, I do. So, look, I think that others are better situated to look into this than I am. But I think most important, because the department is going to be very reluctant to share, and it's going to be a fight to get information, we need to encourage the new Attorney General to do an internal and independent investigation and take corrective action.
And just one more circle back on something that CNN is trying to nail down, that there were over 100 people in the basket of who they were collecting records on. Does that sound like anything that's familiar to your understanding of the scope of the situation?